the agenda, citizens communication. I don't see anyone here, so I think we can proceed to approval of the minutes. Item 3A, meeting minutes of the September 9th, 2024 meeting minutes. Do you all need time to review them, or did you all get a chance to review them in advance?
I had a chance to review them.
I got a chance to as well.
Okay, can we get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, second?
One second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, and it's approved. Where are we? Okay. Item 4A on the agenda is a presentation on the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, by Emily Barron, Assistant City Manager.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So one of the topics on your list of interested topics was the Community Development Block Grant Program. And so we'll kind of cover the highlights of the program that we have here. So the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, is a grant funded by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's given to entitlement communities over 50,000 population. You automatically become an entitlement community, which we did. And officially, it's done by the census, and we accepted it in 2014. And so we've been an entitlement community with CDBG for 10 years this year. Through that, you establish various plans, the first being the consolidated plan, which is like a 5-year planning plan. So take a look at what your priorities are, and then every year you submit to HUD an action plan. Those are the things you say you're going to do with the dollars you get from HUD related to this grant. Those all go back to the consolidated plan and the engagement that you do over that time period. We just actually wrapped up our third consolidated plan earlier this year, which identified our priorities for CDBG for the next 5 years. So here's a little bit of the process of that consolidated plan. It's really about determining needs, and the CDBG grant, the goal is to serve low to moderate income residents. And it can also be done in block groups, which are considered low to moderate income as defined by the census, or a resident, which we have low to moderate income residents all over the community, and that's based on their household income. And they have to meet those thresholds as defined by HUD. For the consolidated plan, we look at those determining needs, setting those priorities, which we mentioned, the resources that we'd have available, what are our ultimate goals, how are we going to administer those programs or projects, and then lastly, we go to an evaluation, or we'll call it or kind of a report card at the end of the every year, which is referred to as a CAPER, which is a Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. And that's basically what we do every year, from the action plan to the CAPER, to make sure that we're spending those dollars as the consolidated plan had intended us to spend them. So earlier this year, I mentioned we did the consolidated plan. We put out a needs assessment. We got a total of 346 responses were received. A lot of them focused on infrastructure and transportation options. That's a lot of the feedback we got. That has been consistent since we started the CDBG program. So a lot of our projects have gone around infrastructure in certain block groups that qualify for those funds. So we've rebuilt streets, we've added sidewalks. We're currently working on a street light program, which will be over in the Windermere, and we call them the cloud streets over off of Nimbus. So those funds go towards a lot of infrastructure. And then we have some others, which I'll highlight here, which are more of our programs focused on kids' scholarships for rec programs, our seniors, as well as some workforce dollars that go as well. So those priorities were established through the consolidated plan, and as I mentioned, they focused on infrastructure, so public facility and infrastructure improvement, improved access to public services, furthering fair housing, and planning and administration. That's kind of the order and priority of those based on the feedback, and then the adoption of the consolidated plan by City Council. Here's kind of takes that big, larger umbrella and starts to define it a little bit more. Public infrastructures, facilities, really focusing on recreation and services for youth and seniors, workforce training, improve access to transportation for seniors and low income, and then we can also fund program administration through this grant as well. So as I mentioned, there are certain block groups that automatically qualify for improvements within the community, and you see there the kind of darker gray and the bolded line. Those are the city limits, and then the blue are the areas that qualify per HUD, which are the areas for the city that qualify for us to spend public dollars from the grant within those areas. Pflugerville is unique in that many of our residents do well. We don't meet the 50% in requirements, and so we actually have basically a waiver from HUD to spend dollars in certain block groups, even though they don't meet the 50% threshold. And those are identified here, and you can see one that's at 48.76%, and then just outside the city limits, you can see some of those shorter ones. Otherwise, they'd have to be 50% or greater in those neighborhoods in order to qualify for infrastructure improvements.
50% of the residents? Got it.
So that's generally, you'll see kind of in the block groups where we can put infrastructure dollars in the Windermere, Yellow Sage area. And if you've driven through Yellow Sage, Belmead, El Molino, Yellow Sage, and Green Meadows were all reconstructed using CDBG dollars. We've done some sidewalks over in Gatlinburg, right along Emmanuel at Pigeon Forge. We're able to do a sidewalk there too. As development comes, HUD will reevaluate the block groups, and they do that recalculation to ensure that they stay within that area. Sometimes they fall out. We had a block group north of Windermere when we first started the program that was within the qualified block groups. However, right before we were issuing a contract to construct sidewalks, they redid the calculation for this, and it fell outside of that, and we were not allowed to spend the dollars there. The key to that was making sure the contract was signed as quickly as possible to ensure we could do those improvements there. So that's generally what it looks like when we're looking at infrastructure. We're focusing on those blue areas that are within the bolded line within the city limits. So funding allocation, CDBG is done on a formula. It's a formula grant that HUD calculates that, and when it goes into the federal budget, and then all of the entitlements get a set amount every year. When we started the program, we got about $230,000. This year, we got $300,000 of this grant. So you think it's really not a whole lot of money. And so we really try to look at, especially when infrastructure projects are the highest on your list, that doesn't really get you very far.
Yeah.
And then you also have to spend it in what they call a timely way, right? You've got to get them expended so that you get that those dollars. They want you using them. And so we've been able to do work from design and then into construction, spread those dollars out as much as we possibly can for infrastructure. And then the balance of our programs, the youth scholarships, senior scholarships, and workforce housing are limited to 15% of your dollars. So you can't spend a whole lot there, but you can do 15% towards programming. And in 2024, this is our draft. We're waiting on the final acceptance by HUD that has been submitted. How we allocated that $300,000 was for Parkway Drive design and construction. So working on design, and we'll move into construction. We think that'll be a good long-term CDBG dollar to be able to contribute to that. So the bulk of that you see goes towards that $270,000. Recreation scholarships for youth and our seniors are $10,000. How that works, all of our youth or seniors, your household qualifies as low to moderate income based on the federal standards. You can qualify to receive up to $200 in scholarships for any of our parks and recreation programs. So if they're offering a dance class or gymnastics or something at the rec center, swim lessons, you can do that. What we find that most of our residents use it for is for our summer camp programs. Through that, our residents have been able to use that to pay for 2 weeks of summer camp for their kids. And so that's been our biggest use. We've kind of been on a little bit of a roller coaster of how we use it, how it's used because of COVID. Once COVID, we were finally on the kind of the uphill of getting people to use their dollars and really respond to those classes, but then COVID hit, and it's taken us a little bit of time to get people back into using those dollars more regularly. So we had started with $15,000. We think $10,000 is really the sweet spot for that currently. So we try different marketing techniques to reach our students and seniors that need that program.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean? Like what was tried?
So we've looked at doing better with working with the school district on reaching students within those block groups specifically because we know that they're there. However, we know that there are students all over the community that need them. Different types of social media campaigns, talking more directly to our seniors so that they know that they're available because they may not be on social media. And working more closely with our comms team on how to do better outreach, as well as our park staff who see a lot of these kids doing their programs and making sure that they're aware of that. We also provide information at the library where people get a lot of resources as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Workforce Solutions is a partnership with Workforce Solutions to offer workforce training to qualified residents. So you still have to meet the low to moderate income, but then you can go to one of their training programs, and this program will pay for that. So it could be a variety of skills that's offered by them that will be paid for through this program. This is, I think, our second year in working with Workforce Solutions to do that. Mm-hmm. The balance is in administration and planning, about $5,000, and that helps to cover some of the, none of the staffing costs, but really the notifications required, publications that are required through the newspaper for all this. A huge amount of notices required for this program to ensure that the community is aware of what's going on. And so that makes up the bulk this year of our CDBG program.
So would that include something like in community impact or like a periodical
Really,
like that? Or
it really covers our newspaper requirements for public notice through like the Statesman or the Flag.
okay, I guess that was my
Yeah.
question. Which
Yeah.
periodicals are these notices being put in?
They're the required public notices. I think we have used community impact in the past for our scholarship program when we're running our, we'll partner with them like on our parks events and things like that. I think we've used that before as well. Here are just some images of of the Parkway Drive. You can kind of see Parkway Drive if you have not driven over there. It's an older road. It's, really looks a little more rural in this instance, doesn't have the curb and gutter, it's got ditch side drainage. And so working to design that to be more of your typical cross-section, curb and gutter and sidewalks for this area. And so this is our major project for CDBG and the infrastructure this year. So with that, I hope that helps. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
So the topic of public transport came up.
Uh-huh.
So I know you guys have done roads and stuff, but have you considered any like programs in terms of getting people mobility around town,
Mm-hmm.
like through public-private partnerships or anything like that?
So through our, we haven't used CDBG dollars for that. Our Fetch a Ride program is reaching a lot of seniors and people with wheelchair accessible vehicle needs. And so we've tried to increase that outside of CDBG in order to meet those transportation needs.
Makes sense.
Okay, any other questions?
No, not from me.
Okay,
Nope, I asked mine along the way, so okay.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, next item is item 5A, discuss and consider action on the listening sessions report.
Good evening, Equity Commission. I'm Brianna Higgins, Special Projects Manager for the City Manager's Office. Just a quick question before I get started. Were all of you able to read through the report that was emailed over?
Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. That will allow this to go just a little bit faster so we don't have to get into all of the nitty gritty and go page by page. Wonderful. So a quick overview that I know each of you are already aware of, but we scheduled about 6 sessions for the Equity Commission to host listening tours around the city. 5 were conducted from May through September. Approximately 38 attendees with about 6 survey respondents were in attendance. The 38 attendees was based off of the demographic sheets that we collected with like 5 extra added to that because we know not everyone completed a demographic survey, but we didn't take an exact count. These sessions were hosted at the Circle of Hope location, St. Elizabeth Catholic Church, and then a session was scheduled to be hosted at the Pflugerville Justice Center. You'll see in the report it's mentioned that the Equity Commission was unable to host a session in Vietnamese due to a lack of attendees, and I'll touch on that in just a bit when I get to our future recommendations. But we did have sessions scheduled in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. The survey that was posted online was available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, but all survey respondents responded in English. Pressing the wrong button. I'm going to do a very high overview of the report so that we're not going through each question, but certainly if there are questions that you have or anything that stuck out to you, please interrupt me and ask that. Some common themes. So some of the early questions on in the night are, what do you like about Pflugerville? What do you hope never change? So the themes of what's happening now is respondents love the small town charm. That was very overwhelmingly stated. They like our unique identity, and that our unique identity includes mom and pop restaurants and shops, that it feels friendly and welcoming, that it's diverse, that when you walk down the street in your neighborhood's diverse. You heard that they really enjoyed being able to, that not everything is very placed. So it's not one neighborhood is one type of individual, one neighborhood is another type of individual, but really that mix in. And then they love our trails and parks. That was also stated a lot. The library was also mentioned to be loved as well. That's some of the now in those earlier questions. Then we ask, what needs to improve? What needs to work better? What do you want to see change? What needs to improve? And so what was said was affordability, including housing affordability and affordability just in general. Traffic, mobility, and connection. Those are three words that really shorten what was said, but overwhelmingly we did hear that, they want improvements to be able to walk places, improvements to bike places, improvements to drive, and access to transportation. And so you'll see accessibility. It's not just accessibility in terms of ADA compliance, but accessibility in the sense of being able to access transportation, being able to access resources such as food resources or housing affordability resources, or simply just access to knowledge and education, or access to city council and being able to give their feedback. And then you'll see another improvement was education. This isn't education in the sense of the education that PFISD provides, although there were some comments that included, we'd like PFISD to expand on language accessible books and programs, and having a little bit more diversity in the classroom. But education on what is an ETJ, or what are the plans that you're working on, what's going on in the city, including hearing about things that are happening in the city at HOAs, or that kind of ties into the accessibility piece of being able to access that information. And then you'll see the future. What do you want to, it ties into improvements, but what do you want Pflugerville to be in the future? A common word was affordable. Affordable housing, one respondent included being able to retire here in Pflugerville. That was a note made. They want to remain unique, friendly, and diverse. Some feedback we received was they don't want to look like every other city that's out there. They don't want to be another Austin. They want the city to have those unique restaurants, those unique dining places, and third spaces, and not just, I think one respondent in a meeting said, if I want to go to a Home Depot, I can see a Home Depot in like 8 different cities, but I only have like one green and growing or one pottery place here in Pflugerville. So they also want more locally owned shops. They want improved mobility and infrastructure, while also maintaining affordability in the city. So being able to make sure that we have great infrastructure, streets, roads, access to water, but also making sure that we maintain affordability. And then housing. And there was some feedback about housing. The missing middle was mentioned, as well as just more housing in general. Any questions before I go on to the next?
No?
So some listening tour recommendations. So that was a very high overview of the feedback that we received back, summarized in themes. But you'll see in the report that each question has a summary. Summaries are a little bit longer than others. There's also a section that includes conversations that occurred that weren't with the questions but happened, and that happened in a couple of sessions. And then you'll also see that the feedback was broken down by bullet points by the pillars, the Equity Commission pillars. And so you can see that organized that way as well. The matrix idea that we talked about the entire time didn't quite fit like that, but it worked out well being able to break it down in bullet points. So some listening tour recommendations. There is a page that includes staff recommended actions based on this feedback. This slide only has 3 because if I included every single recommendation, it would be very long. But some things included, hosting workshops on topics such as financial literacy, what an extraterritorial jurisdiction is, what it means to live in the ETJ, making sure that homeowner associations and neighborhood groups are included in discussions, reaching out to them, being involved with the HOAs, and hosting open meetings. Something that was shared was that one respondent at the very last session mentioned, I didn't know we could do this, which was great because this is the first time that we've done this, but also that they didn't know those opportunities were out there. So continuing those types of conversations. You also see that there's a section about future listening sessions. So should the commission decide to continue these sessions, what should that look like in the future? We always want to learn and do better and be better. Some things that we noticed was attendance was higher in areas where it might be more of a public location that you frequent often. So the library had really great attendance. The Justice Center did not, due to the Vietnamese session not having attendees, and I'll touch on that. And Circle of Hope had great attendance. And so maybe more of those locations might serve as better host sites. We also recommended maybe having specific topics at the sessions. We noticed that when, for example, the sessions that happen at Circle of Hope, those attendees were either volunteers of Circle of Hope or received services from Circle of Hope. And what we found was those conversations leaned towards food security and insecurity. It also leaned towards affordability, and the conversation was much more free-flowing versus in the other sessions that the community was invited to and the questions are open and broad. The conversations weren't as free-flowing. They did happen, and we did get a lot of feedback, but we feel that maybe if these sessions are just a little bit more topic-oriented, we might get a lot more feedback and attendees that know they want to provide feedback about this matter. And then targeted outreach to underrepresented groups. So I mentioned that our Vietnamese session did not have any attendees. And what we heard at that session is we actually had some volunteers come to help translate that session who are from the Vietnamese community. And some feedback that they provided was they may not be comfortable coming in and giving their opinion. That's not something that the Vietnamese community generally may enjoy. And so meeting them where they are at looks a little bit different. So one suggestion was flyers and locations that they may frequent. So that might be their churches that they attend. A recommendation was nail salons, high traffic areas, grocery stores, and a QR code or things like that. So we're meeting them where they are, and they might be a little bit more open to providing feedback. And then I mentioned hosting sessions in accessible locations. Yep. Any questions on this slide?
On the recommended actions, are these for city staff to do, or who's doing these actions? I guess, is there a recommendation as to who's doing them?
Yeah, so some of the recommendations might serve well for city staff to take on, such as I think there's one on here about evaluating our traffic signal timing. That's something that staff will do. I wouldn't expect the Equity Commission to go out and evaluate traffic signal timing.
Right.
And we are already doing that, so that flows into that. But one of our next steps, it's not listed here, but one of the next steps includes after you present this to council, really diving into those recommended actions and identifying what it is that the Equity Commission wants to take on and what it is that you prefer staff to lead and handle. Some of those might be a bit more obvious, right? Like traffic signal timing. Something that the Equity Commission might want to do is host a workshop or organize a workshop. You might want to organize resources and identify where resources are and create a program to share that out. Or you might say, you know what, I think that better serves for staff to handle. So that's a conversation that we would have after we present this. Our idea is for the next steps is tonight, you receive the report. If there are any changes you'd like to see in that report, making those changes and then accepting the report. And then at our joint meeting with City Council on November 12th, we'll go through this presentation again, go through the report with council again. And then after that, either a December meeting or a January meeting, go over those recommended actions and identify, talk about them, what it is you want to see happen versus what maybe it isn't something you want to take on.
Gotcha.
And so when we get to like actual next steps, like are we thinking about like after the city council meeting with the city council, or like do we formulate those like tonight, or what is the to get our ideas out there on the table at least? What's the timeline look like for that?
So the timeline on identifying what next steps you want to take.
What actions
Yeah.
do we want to take and things like that?
Our recommendation is doing that after the joint meeting with City Council. They may provide additional feedback to you.
Yeah.
So if tonight you decided to say, we're going to do this, that joint meeting might look different. And so we wouldn't want you to have a different, all of a sudden we have two different ideas going on to make sure that we're in step. But if there are recommended actions on here that you think are missing, like if you read through this report and feel like, I feel like we could do
I
this,
have a whole thing.
that's a great time to add those into the report.
Okay.
And so if there are, if you feel like there were pieces in the summary of the conversations missing, like, at your session, you're like, I feel like we talked about this, but I don't see it reflected in this report. Now's a great time to let us know so we can add that in.
Okay.
If there are recommendations missing that you want added in, now's a great time for us to do that. And then we'll, staff's recommendation is to accept the listening tour report. And so if there are changes, it would be accept the listening tour report with amendments.
Okay.
So that we can provide it to council at the November 12th.
Makes sense.
That is the conclusion of my slides. So I'm happy to take any feedback or answer any questions.
Yeah, so I just kind of I just got to this commission. So I hope that my feedback is looked upon as more of a seek to understand. I think one of the things that would be a great improvement for this is one thing is I noticed also in being in the last session that what came out of this definitely is that we want to be able to continue something like this because it sounds like that is what the community is looking for. The other thing is I think we probably had a more missed opportunity to get more responses by not having a online accessible way to give feedback alongside with the in-person because especially when we do things in the afternoon, there's a lot of people that have previous engagements, they're caretakers, they don't always have the time or the means to actually physically be here and in a presence to give their feedback. And I know like this is our first time doing it and we wanted to encourage in-person being in a group. So I think going forward, if we are going to continue these listening sessions and gathering feedback to offer both options in the name of equity, right? In the name of accessibility, being able to allow folks to be able to give feedback in however means that they can. And I think that's one of my one pieces of feedback. I think the other thing too is I think this report is awesome and points to a lot of things that we probably in our minds as citizens can probably anticipate that people were going to bring up. I think the next go round to your point too about with the Vietnamese community really touches on something too of being able to meet people where they're at And that's not just isolated to that community. Just looking at the broadly in Pflugerville of being able to find out different communities and where they feel comfortable and safe to be able to engage them where they are. And I think my final piece of feedback is I think these 10 questions were a really good start to get a consensus and an understanding of what our citizens are looking for. I do think, though, we had a missed opportunity in getting a little bit more granular with those questions to find out things like what particular programs that you enjoy engaging in, or what programs would you like to engage with, but you don't have the opportunity or you don't know enough information to be able to do. So I think this is a really good exercise for us to do, and I want us to continue to do it. I do think, though, there's some opportunity for us to add a little bit more fine-tuning going forward, but I think this is a really good exercise.
Just to make sure I'm on the right track with my notes, when you say having an online accessible way to give feedback, like a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting?
Well, not just that, but also like we have for like online surveys.
Okay.
Yeah. So being able to ask those questions, we can tailor those questions a little bit more to be friendly to online survey to get feedback. So people are still able to add feedback without necessarily having to be in attendance to get that feedback.
And we did have a short period, if I'm not mistaken, at the end, right?
It was
Like-
open for about a week
Yeah, it was
after
a
the
very short.
sessions.
Yeah.
And it's, if my recollection is right, like, we intentionally did that to promote people coming
Yeah.
in person, but there's
In
a
the name of
downside.
equity, that
Yeah.
doesn't really work.
There's a downside to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And meeting people where they're at, I think, is totally a valid idea. Like we had good success at the food pantry, so like getting into those local stores, getting into those local businesses, having flyers out there, and not just a social media strategy, because not everyone is in tune with Facebook and everything like
Yeah.
that. So it could be a really good thing to engage local businesses as well.
The only comment I was going to make, and it's not an edit because I did see it in here, but in your summary, right, like the things people like, that's like the small town charm. A big takeaway that I heard was like people feel like it's a safe community, like they have a high value on, feeling comfortable that like their neighborhood is safe, or they place a high value on community safety. So I don't know if it didn't come across as much to me in the summary of like small town charm.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, small town charm, but I keep saying small town charm, but really feeling like we value, like our community values safety and a safe community, and wanting to maintain that safe community even as we grow.
I can certainly add that in. I do know there are responses that say that a lot more, and if the report didn't show that immediately, then that means I need to add it in there. So
That would be
I'll add
my
it in just a little bit more, because my notes do show that they
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like when you go back to safety and things like that, it's like building the community as well, like incentivizing small businesses in town, making sure that, like maybe even like a local like campaign about small businesses, just to promote what's out there and make these businesses long-term and sustainable, so we don't have some closings and stuff like that people mourn. And I think it would add to the charm of the town, having that government and private business kind of coalition there too.
Anything else?
I can just give you all this if you want me to.
Yeah.
Cool.
I can certainly add those in. Okay. So what I have is for areas for the future sessions, because making sure that we have an online accessible way to give feedback, not just Teams and Zoom, but surveys and asking questions that lean towards good survey results. Making sure that we are engaging people where they are, and having more pointed questions for future go-arounds. Promoting it, getting into local stores and businesses, having physical flyers and locations and not just a social media campaign. Making sure that we add a little bit more about people feeling safe in the community, and that's reflected in the summary. And then for recommended action, a local campaign with small businesses, building those relationships with our small businesses and building that community, and then additional feedback from Corey's report.
And you guys can have one of these.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, because
make
we're
copies.
we're not at the. I mean, we're still just
Not at that
not at
point.
that stage, but it'd be good. Yeah.
These are just my initial thoughts, like
Yeah.
from the report.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so staff's recommendation is that you approve with the amendments that you've provided for the listening tour report, and then upon approval, we'll make sure that the finalized report that has these additional comments is provided to you, as well as it'll be provided in the packet for City Council for the November 12th meeting.
Great.
All right.
Cool.
So do I need to request a motion, or I make the motion?
Yes, please.
I can make the motion.
You can make the motion.
Okay, so I move to approve and accept the listening tour report to be provided to City Council at the November 12th work session joint meeting.
With amendments.
What's that? With amendments.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Always do something. All right. And that was the end of the agenda. It is 7:06 and we can adjourn. Great. I just was like, did I just switch my